Thank you very much. Sam has asked me to say a few things about municipal reform in Canada, the history thereof. There have been three major reform periods in Canada, roughly 1820 to 1849, around the turn of the 19th into the 20th century, and then again in the 1960s into the 1980s, gaps of about 50 years. Each of these waves arose out of and in reaction to its preceding period. Each overlapped with the others. Each contributed to the foundations of Canadian civic political culture, and each still appeals to a particular strand in Canadian politics. Now, with an interval of about 40 or so years, Sam posed the question to me, are we ready for a fourth wave in urban reform? The reference to Santayana is that he once famously observed that those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. His point was that progress is not rooted in absolute change, but depends upon retentiveness, since a complete dump gives us nothing to improve upon. To begin today's conversation, we should note that three distinct missions for local government were defined early on, well before Confederation. Each had a different general objective. These roots became very deeply etched, and they both inspire and limit what Canadian cities can be today. These three missions are: as a court, as a public corporation, and as an experiment in direct democracy. The past is the place to start. Comprehensive reform movements then, first, had been active during the 1820s, but they gained recognition with Lord Durham's report after the rebellion of 1837. Municipal institutions were not mentioned in the subsequent Act of Union. However, the Municipal Corporations Act, the Baldwin Act of 1849, was the natural result of the struggle for responsible and representative government. It was formulated in that mindset. The problem was that the Act did not settle conflicting ideas about the role of municipalities. The reformers shared only one piece of common ground. They said municipal government would be a refuge from political conflict and rancor, a haven for unadorned common sense. Thus, there was no need for ministerial government, nor political parties, nor politicians. The problem was that we still had the three distinctive definitions of what common sense was. The first was found in the county courts of quarter sessions. They were originally responsible for ensuring public order and certain limited civic administration. Even today, a mayor is referred to as your worship, the chief magistrate of the city. And this is scary, as Mayor Sam could have read the Riot Act quite literally. In doing their responsibilities, councils are distinct from other legislatures in that they address and mete out piecemeal justice to individuals. The third on the chart, came with the Loyalists, who had a personal experience with direct democracy in the form of the New England Town Meeting. For them, municipal governing meant that popular will could be expressed directly through small units of local government, open assemblies of citizens. This was the liberal thinking of the time. Local government, those of you who remember your mill, would be a training ground for citizenship for both citizens and for those they chose to represent them. So you have another cliche born. Alexis Tocqueville spoke of local government being the cornerstone of democracy. The second justification here was that local government would be a public corporation with a Crown Charter. This was the living reality of local government in the 19th century. They had status as incorporated bodies. through the actions of a superior legislature. And this established a long-held principle that the council was a subordinate agency which could only address those matters that were clearly spelled out by statute. We live this reality today. However, all three strands still hold some salience for city electors today. These first wave reform moves meant that virtually anything is possible at City Hall so long as you can ground your appeal in one of the three permanent strands in our political culture. The public ideology sustaining Canadian city government is vibrant, but it appears incoherent simply because it has never agreed upon a single, widely shared endgame. This always gave rise to subsequent reform. The second wave of reform may be called corporation government. It emanated from the United States around the end of the 19th century, early into the 20th. Such reformers as James Bryce were very pessimistic about urban society. For him and the reformers, the problem for cities was bosses, a political machine as highly effective partisanship. The reform period became an exercise in urban pathology and strong anti-partyism. In Canada, this reform was grounded in the corporate strand of our civic reform culture, and it emerged in reaction to the judicial and populist roots of the first wave. The Bible for continental reformers was the National Municipal League and its municipal program, which mischievously included a model city charter, which is just like the baseball caps we see so widely today, one size fits all. For Canada, this became a prescription quickly, but it was one addressing no pre-existing conditions. Some additional mechanisms were tacked on to the second reform: the referendum, the initiative, the recall of public officials. This originated in post-World War I progressivism. But Bryce, James Bryce, who was the British ambassador to America, drew upon his network of cronies and a New York Reform Commission to legitimate the reform actions and to specify what had to be done to clean up city government. He was instrumental in putting this together. What were the essentials? There we go. There's no test, no memory necessary. This is the guts of it. The program of the National Municipal League. This was put into practice very quickly. In 1915, the League went further from this original program by copying the private corporation further to concentrate executive power in a city manager and not an elected mayor. Almost like a tidal wave, a tsunami of change swept across Canada. Canadian reformers rapidly accepted these recommendations, and the main programs were adopted. The city of Westmont became the first in Canada to appoint a city manager in 1913. And I think you're well aware that the city manager council arrangement is the gold standard for local government administration today. Finally, I think it is important to note about the second reform period that it was not an ideologically neutral activity. It held and continues to hold a bias in favor of suppressing certain kinds of conflict. It maximizes the influence of certain political resources, money, expertise, social standing, at the expense of others: community organization, local leadership, neighborhood knowledge. It is not surprising that its strongest Canadian adherents have always been in the business community and professional ranks. The general objective was to sterilize politics out of City Hall. The third wave, Populist Revolt. This emerged in the mid-1970s through the 1980s in reaction to this second period of sterilizing politics out. The destructive intrusion of redevelopment into established neighborhoods bred local reaction to centralized bureaucratic planning, but it usually took a catalyst. Normally, this was freeways that fostered citywide reform movements. What this did was to transform ordinary residents into urban activists. And for a short cycle, citizen advocacy and direct action enjoyed wide support in places like Vancouver, Toronto, and Edmonton. Much of this was grounded in direct participation theory. Some community leaders tried to realize direct democracy through modernizing government structures to produce neighborhood government. The program was essentially, these were the dominant themes of the period. It was a clear divide in urban values and an attempt to repoliticize the city. The third wave reformers were process Democrats. Policy would be primarily evaluated on how open and participatory the process had been. Majoritarianism would prevail. The themes are, as you can read, politics was to be all about neighborhoods, just as it had been in the good old days. So to summarize, binoculars, but this is just a comparison of the three. The thing is that, are we ready for a fourth wave? Controlled by citizen movements produced momentary triumphs with little legacy of achievement. City politicians tended to take to the new rhetoric of direct involvement like ducks to water, but they carried on as always, even when a pig in a city failed. In the end, just as students do not find it necessary to attend lectures that have no bearing on final exams, the citizens found no time to participate in meetings without consequence. In the end, grassroots democracy was proven irreconcilable and incompatible with the facade of administrative decentralization sullenly deployed by councillors to assuage and to manipulate citizen demands. The lesson from the past, we are not insulated from change. We have an open society. Reform waves, secondly, arise out of and in reaction to conditions set down by their predecessors, and in looking for the potential emergence of a fourth wave. It would be simply to try to define today's discontents within a broad sweep of a long-shared urban political culture. Thank you.